always interesting in terms of sex differences because, you know, having done an undergraduate in psychology, we did lots of lab reports and reading in relation to gender differences cross-culturally. And then I suppose now, and having spoken to the Centre for Open Science, you know, some of the issues in terms of the replication crisis in psychology, and that sort of undermining the project to some extent.
Right. Well, in a sense, a nomological network protects you against the replication crisis, because nomological networks are, so there are two types of replications when you talk about replication. There is what's called a direct replication. So let's say Mark has published a paper on facial symmetry, okay? So I want to replicate your finding in a direct way, meaning I want to use your exact stimuli, your exact instructions. So I do a direct replication of what you did. A conceptual replication is broader. It's, I want to, let's say you found that, beauty is captured through facial symmetry. Well, is there some alternate way where I can establish that phenomenon using different stimuli? That would be a conceptual replication. So there are two types of replications. Now, a nomological network is, it's not a replication, but what it's saying is I can offer you distinct lines of evidence, all of which point to the same incontrovertible true finding. Now, why did I start by saying all this? Because when evolutionary scientists are trying to argue that something is an adaptation, they typically are going to look for multiple lines of evidence to make that argument. Therefore, the evidentiary threshold that evolutionary scientists operate under is astoundingly higher than the other. Go ahead.
Well, it has to be, because you've got the danger when you're trying to construct an evolutionary theory, that when you extrapolate backwards, you increase the error rate, if that makes sense.
It does, and that's why you build those nomological networks. That's why when people say, well, it's unfalsifiable, just so storytelling, it really pisses me off, because it is actually doing the exact opposite, right? So when I want to try to prove to you that the hourglass figure is an adaptation, what do? So I could get you data from radically different cultures, right? I could go to the Yanomamo tribe in the Amazon and show you that they prefer the same. So already that is way higher on the evidentiary threshold. Most psychology studies, I take 30 undergrads from my lab and I'm done. Good night, mic drop.
Yes.
So I could get you data from across cultures. I could get you data from across temporally. So I can show you that there are figurines from 3,000 years ago where we analyze those figurines. They have that waist to hip ratio. I could get you female escorts data, as I did in a paper that I published, showing you that across 48 countries where women advertise their sexual services online, they tend to advertise the waist to hip ratio that is a universally preferred. I can get you brain imaging data that shows you that the pleasure center in men's brains are much more likely to light up when I show you imaging. So I can get you a astoundingly varied set of data, which makes it incontrovertible that there certainly seems to be very compelling evidence in support of my argument, and yet some idiot will write to me and say, but come on, Dr. Saad, you just smoke a pipe and just come up with these fanciful stories. Meanwhile, I put myself through the rigor of an astoundingly higher set of thresholds before I prove my point. So that's why it's galling, because to me, it's an attack on the decency of reason, right? Because you are attacking me for exactly the opposite of what I do.
It's an invalidation, I suppose. I want to get back to that, because I think there's a point I'm really interested in relation to this. But I think the thing that you've struggled with, and I think that also other people like perhaps Jordan Peterson and also what the Grevin studies tried to some extent address was that if social constructionism embeds all causation in culture and language, it becomes a form of solipsism, which is maddening to argue against.
Right.
Right.
True. Well, I'll just build on what you just said. So when I was laying out all the idea pathogens in the parasitic mind, I wanted to try to come up with some universal mechanism that explains why do these idea pathogens arise. They're very different. So in the same way, though, that different cancers behave very differently, but what they all have in common is the unchecked division of cells, right? So that, at least, if we keep going down the various cancers, at least we can agree that that's a commonality across all cancers. Well, I wanted to look at, so what is common to all these idea pathogens? And so to speak, maybe in an oblique way to the last point you made, I think what they all do is that they offer hope whilst injuring truth. In other words, it's kind of a consequentialist thing, right? There is a noble goal of providing people with hope. And I'll give specific examples in a second. So if in the pursuit of creating a more hopeful world, we have to murder and rape truth, so be it. So example, social constructivism. That's why I thought of it, because you mentioned social constructivism. Well, it is a wonderfully hopeful message to say that my child, if only I hug him enough or don't hug him enough or give him enough Big Macs or maybe not enough Big Macs or whatever the sequence of reinforcement, could be the next Michael Jordan. It's not a very nice message for me to know that my son was not born with equal potentiality to Michael Jordan, that he could never jump as high as Michael Jordan. That sucks. So it's much nicer to construct a narrative of bullshit that makes us all be able to, wallow in endless hope. My son could be the next Einstein. He could be the next Jordan. He could be the next Messi. So social constructivism at its root is a beautiful message, perfectly rooted in bullshit, but it's a beautiful message, right? The reality is we're not equal, and we're equal under the law. We're not equal in potentiality. There is something unique about Lionel Messi that allows him to move on a soccer pitch in ways that you will never be able to, Mark. And that's not because mommy didn't hug you enough. Now let's take another one. Cultural relativism suffers from the exact same mechanism, right? Yes. Cultural relativism came about from Franz Boas, the cultural anthropologist at Columbia University, and Margaret, his eventual student, right? Who was desperate to extricate the human condition from any biological imperatives, because there are all kinds of cretinous people who misused evolutionary theory. So they start off with a noble goal, which is, let's create a worldview where these kinds of ugly realities will no longer happen. And in the service of that noble goal, if we erect 100 years of edifices of bullshit, so be it. So they are consequentialists, whereas I am, when it comes to the truth, I am pathological as a deontological person. I never sacrifice to a fault, to my career. Although one might argue I've had a very successful career, but in some milieus, I've suffered professionally because I call it like it is, because I simply cannot modulate speaking truth. Now, that doesn't mean I'm impolite. It doesn't mean, by the way, that we're not all consequentialists at some points. So, and I jokingly say in the book, forgive me, go ahead. You want to interject?
No, I was just going to say, I think it's powerful because it's a monism. And so anything that is a single cause, I mean, obviously sociocentric systems are true to some extent, in the same way that behaviorism and virocentric systems are true to some extent. They're just not completely true.
Exactly true.
And so when you invalidate the biological, you end up with something that no longer tethers to reality.
Exactly right.